Everything began that morning when Los Angeles looked colder than usual, despite the mild January climate. I'm Sophie, 28 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been working as a waitress in a small cozy cafe. It was a place where we rarely had famous people, and that's why I didn't immediately realize who my late customer was. He entered the cafe just as I was about to finish my shift. Tall, with a weary gaze, wearing a baseball cap that hid his face, he sat in a corner by the window. He looked like he was carrying a burden too heavy for one person. I brought him the menu. He ordered something, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Just another night, another shift. Who could have thought it would change everything? When he finished and was about to leave, I noticed that his wallet had fallen under the table. I rushed out from behind the counter, grabbing it, and ran outside. The night was cool, and the air seemed to burn my face. "Sir, you forgot this," I called out, catching up to him just as he was opening the door of a black sedan. He turned around, slightly startled, and then I realized who it was. It was Donald Trump. Unexpectedly, I felt my heart stop. A faint smile lit up his face. "Thank you," he muttered, looking at the wallet in my hands. Then he added, pausing slightly, "You didn't even look inside?" I laughed nervously. Why would I do that? A shadow of relief flashed across his face. But the next day turned into a real nightmare for me. The manager met me at the cafe door before I even had a chance to take off my coat. "You left your workstation in the middle of your shift to chase after some customer," he said sharply, not even giving me a chance to explain. "We can't afford such carelessness. You're fired." I stood there, stunned. Words stuck in my throat. My desire to do a good deed had backfired. Tears filled my eyes, and grabbing my things, I left the cafe, not knowing what to do next. The next day, I woke up feeling empty. My small apartment in Los Angeles suddenly felt even smaller. How would I pay the rent now? How would I cope when everything seemed to be falling apart? I sat on the couch, hugging my knees, trying to gather my thoughts, when suddenly my phone vibrated. It was my friend Lydia. "Sophie, you're in the news," she wrote, attaching a link. I didn't immediately understand what she was talking about. My heart started beating faster when I opened the video. It was a news report where Donald Trump was talking about me. "That night," he said, his voice firm but with a note of vulnerability, "I had just returned from the hospital. Someone I love very much was in critical condition. I felt drained, broken, and then this woman, this angel of kindness, returned my wallet. She didn't know me, didn't expect anything, just wanted to help." I watched the screen, almost forgetting to breathe. He was talking about me. But that wasn't all. His eyes met the camera, and he continued, "I've been looking for her. She didn't introduce herself, but if she's watching this video, I want to thank her. And if there's anything I can do for her, I'll do everything in my power." My hands were shaking as I read the comments under the video. Many people supported his words, calling me a hero, although I felt differently. But at the same time, fear gripped me. What if he really found me? What would I say to him? How would I explain that I no longer had a job, that I wasn't coping with life? The phone vibrated again. It was Lydia again. "Sophie, is that really you?" she wrote. "This is incredible. You have to respond to him." I put down the phone and stared at the wall. A small act of kindness had turned into something huge, and I still didn't know how to deal with it. The next morning, I decided to go outside to clear my head. The cool Los Angeles air felt sharper than usual, and I wrapped myself in my old coat, trying to warm up. The city was alive. Cars honked, people hurried about their business. I walked down the street, lost in thought, and didn't immediately notice the black sedan parked by the curb next to me. "Excuse me," a voice said from behind me. I froze. It was painfully familiar. Slowly turning around, I met eyes with Donald Trump. His face was soft, and his gaze was surprisingly warm. He recognized me. "It's you," he said, his voice almost relieved. I didn't know what to say. Words stuck in my throat. He took a step forward, his smile kind but his eyes serious. "I've been looking for you," he continued. "Thank you for returning my wallet. It meant more to me than you can imagine." I nervously smiled, trying to hide my embarrassment. "It was just a small thing," I murmured. "You would have done the same." "I don't think it was a small thing," he countered. His voice softened, but his gaze remained focused. Not everyone would have done that, especially without looking inside. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and quickly looked at the screen. It was a notification from my landlord. Rent is overdue. Eviction notice sent. My heart sank. Panic gripped me, but I hid the phone, hoping he wouldn't notice. "Are you okay?" he asked. There was so much genuine concern in his voice that I couldn't lie. I'm fine," I lied, struggling to hold back tears. But it seemed like he could see right through me. His gaze softened and he took another step closer. "Sophie, if something's wrong, you can tell me," he said calmly, almost in a whisper. "Let me help." I shook my head, trying to refuse his offer. But at that moment the tears broke through. With a trembling voice I managed to say, "I lost my job. I was fired because I left to return your wallet. And now I can't pay for my apartment." I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling vulnerable and humiliated. His expression changed. There wasn't a hint of pity, only understanding. "That's not fair," he said firmly. "You don't deserve that." I couldn't respond. I just looked at him, waiting for him to judge or try to brush off my story. But instead, he slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Please take this," he said, handing it to me. I looked at him, not understanding what was happening. Slowly unfolding the paper, I saw a check. The amount on it made me freeze. It was more than I could imagine. "I can't accept this," I whispered. "It's too much." He smiled, and there was so much warmth in his smile that I felt my doubts beginning to fade. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's about what you did for me. You gave me hope that night when I thought I had lost it. Let me repay you for your kindness." I stood on the sidewalk holding the check in my hands, unable to stop looking at it. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: gratitude, doubt, fear. Donald watched me with an expression full of understanding. "I can't accept this," I repeated, feeling a wave of panic rising. "It's too large an amount." "Sophie," he said calmly, "this is not just money. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to get back on your feet. Please take it." I didn't know what to say. It felt like the words were stuck somewhere between my throat and my heart. His kindness was genuine, but I still had doubts. Suddenly, his expression changed. A shadow of sadness appeared in his eyes, making me feel that he was about to say something important. "There's something I didn't tell you that night," he said softly, avoiding my gaze. I frowned, not knowing where he was going with this. "What?" I asked cautiously. He looked at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "That night, I had just returned from the hospital. My sister, she's fighting cancer." My heart stopped. I felt my chest tighten with emotions I couldn't fully understand. He continued, his voice trembling. "She's strong, but the battle is getting harder. I was so depressed, so drained. And then you returned my wallet. But that wasn't the main thing. You restored my faith in people, in the idea that even in the darkest moments, there is light." I looked at him, not knowing what to say. His pain was so evident that I felt my own tears beginning to stream down my cheeks. I took a step forward without thinking, and gently placed my hand on his. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I had no idea what you were going through." He smiled at me, a weak, bitter smile. "You couldn't have known. But you did more for me than I can express in words. You gave me a reason to keep going." At that moment, I realized that his offer to help me was not just an act of generosity. It was a way to return the hope I had once given him. But that didn't negate his pain, his burden. Looking into his eyes, I felt a connection between us that I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. The next day, I woke up determined to take a step forward. The check still lay on my kitchen table, but I couldn't bring myself to use it. It was not just a gift. It was something much more. I needed to understand what to do next. After much thought, I decided to go where I suspected he might be. The hospital. The place that seemed to be the heart of everything happening in his life. I put on my best coat and headed there, unsure of what awaited me. When I approached the registration desk, a wave of uncertainty washed over me. How would I explain why I came? But before I could say anything, the nurse behind the desk smiled at me. Are you Sophie? She asked. I froze surprised. Yes, I breathed. Come with me. He mentioned you, she said softly, inviting me to follow her. We walked down long corridors until we stopped in front of a quiet room. Through the window in the door, I saw Donald sitting by his sister's bed. He was holding her hand, talking to her in a soft voice. His shoulders were hunched, his face tired, but there was tenderness in his eyes. The nurse slightly opened the door and gestured for me to enter. Donald turned his head, and his eyes widened in surprise when he saw me. Sophie, he said, standing up. I felt awkward, as if I had intruded on something personal. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. I began, but his sister interrupted me with her warm voice. Is this her? She asked, smiling. Donald nodded, his gaze not leaving me. Yes, this is her, he replied softly. I stepped closer, feeling my heart tighten with emotions. Hi, I said gently, addressing his sister. I'm Sophie. She smiled at me, despite the fatigue visible on her face. Thank you for helping my brother, she said. He needs people who remind him that kindness still exists. We talked about many things. Her passion for painting, the childhood they spent together, how she was fighting her illness. Despite the heavy topic, there was an incredible warmth in the room, as if each of us found something important in the conversation. As I was about to leave, Donald walked me into the hallway. His face became serious. Sophie, he said, I don't think you understand how much you've changed my life. I looked at him, feeling tears well up in my eyes. You've changed mine too, I whispered. He paused for a moment as if weighing his words. I don't want this to be the last time we see each other, he said finally. My breath caught. It doesn't have to be, I replied, smiling. At that moment, as if fate itself decided to intervene, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen and his face tensed. It's the doctor, he said. I nodded, taking a step back. Go, I said firmly, despite how painful it was to let go of that moment. Before leaving, he turned to me and said, This isn't goodbye, Sophie. I stood in the hallway watching him walk away. For the first time in a long time, I felt that there was something more ahead than just a struggle for survival. Something that made me believe that kindness really could change the world, even when everything seemed lost.